Welcome to the Hud Grad Club. I'm Chris Webb, and I'm the Alumni Engagement Career Consultant with the University of Huddersfield's Careers Employability Service. And, full disclosure, I'm also a University of Huddersfield graduate. So I've generally got pretty positive things to say about both the institution and any of our graduates. But don't take my word for it. In this podcast, we'll be meeting different members of the University of Huddersfield's global alumni community, finding out what makes them tick, about their experiences during their time at the university and their career journeys since completing their studies. Join us as we explore the inspiring, innovative and diverse range of individuals that make up the Hud Grad Club. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hud Grad Club. And Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much for joining us. So we'll start kind of the podcast really with, I guess, kind of looking at people who haven't come across you before, who don't know you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. When did you kind of graduate from the university and what are you kind of doing currently?
So I graduated in 2011 from Huddersfield University. I studied graphic design, which I think back then was part of a visual communications degree. It was tied up with advertising and illustration. So lots of collaboration from the get-go on that degree, which was really cool. And I'm now a freelance graphic designer.
Fantastic. So we start every episode, as always, with our greatest Hud story ever told section. So this sounds very grand. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but it's all about finding out a little bit more about your experience at the university, your time at the university, and any kind of key memories that you want to share. So let's kick things off. Any kind of big memories or sort of happy memories of time at the university you'd like to kind of share on the podcast?
Too many for the podcast, I would say. But I would say like the main reason why I chose Huddersfield is because I actually had an opportunity to kind of visit Huddersfield and experience the student lifestyle before I'd even picked my top 3 universities. I met a friend through MySpace, of all places. That shows my age. He was at Huddersfield in first year, the year before me. And he said, like, oh, it's amazing, you should come up and visit sometime. So I did. Stayed in Stores Hall. So had a proper first year experience there for a few days. And then I loved it so much that I actually, when I got back to college, I changed my preferences.
Wow.
I think, where was it? It was either Leicester or Nottingham was my top choice. And I loved Huddersfield so much that I decided to put it at the top of the list. So that's why I ended up going to Huddersfield. And memories wise, I mean, I had my 21st birthday in first year, which was ridiculously messy, but ridiculously fun as well. Just spring and summer at Stores Hall was fantastic. It's the nicest student halls I've ever been to. And I'm not just saying that because I went there, I visited so many as well. Just loved being there. But I also just loved exploring the north as well. It's so close to Manchester, Leeds, York, Sheffield, Liverpool. I went to all of these places whilst I was at Huddersfield and I had the best time. I really, really did. And I just so many memories were made, particularly in first year, I would say, messy memories, but fun memories.
It's ones that we can't share in full detail on the podcast, but nonetheless, memories, yeah, of course.
I think it was fun times.
Really interesting what you've said there about as well, I guess the different sort of culture that you found kind of living in the north of England. And has that kind of been something, was that sort of a bit of a difference to what you had sort of where you'd grown up, or was it just kind of something that sort of surprised you when you came to visit, or is it something that you sort of grew on you, I guess, as you moved through your time in uni?
I think so I'm from Reading originally, so just outside London. And the reason why I chose Huddersfield, not only from my experience with my friend before I actually went, but I actually wanted to get far enough away to be independent, but not too far enough away if I had to come home, right? So when I got to Huddersfield, I was just like, oh, it's just going to be like anywhere else. I'd never been up north. I think the furthest north I'd been was probably Oxford at that point. So, not very far. When I arrived, I was just so blown over by how friendly and how nice everyone is. I mean, don't get me wrong, they'll tell you straight if you're doing something wrong, but that's what I also love and appreciate about them. There's no pussyfooting around. You get what you get with people up north. there's an authenticity to people who are from up north. Yeah, so that's kind of like what my experience of the people up there was, I think.
That's great. And I mean, I think, you mentioned as well, sort of when we spoke previously, that I guess, the academic side was important. We're going to talk a little bit about that maybe sort of through the podcast. But I guess from what you're saying, the personal kind of experience that you had through your time at university was sort of what was a bit more transformative, I guess.
It really was. And like for me personally as well, like I was coming to terms with my sexuality in my first and second year as well. And I took a year out like to do a placement year, and then that's kind of when I came out. So this was 2010, and I was really sort of, as many gay people I imagine probably feel, like just so nervous about telling family, but also like telling all my friends at university as well, because like I'd already sort of like signed up to like live with people and stuff like that, and in my brain I'm like, what are people going to think? But like anyone and everyone I told was just so welcoming and so happy for me that it just made my final year at university like probably my most authentic year. And that just really like it helped me be a lot more confident, a lot more comfortable with the people, but also with my coursework as well. Like I got my first ever A in final year, and just because I wasn't holding back anymore, I was really just enjoying myself like to the full, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess that's, as you were saying, super important when it then comes to that transition period of kind of leaving university, feeling that you're in a sort of positive or authentic place to kind of move forward with everything. And that leads us really nicely, I guess, onto that part of your career. So, as you mentioned, MySpace was a thing back when you were, sort of pre-grad university. We won't talk about, too much about when you graduated. Or
Thank you.
but as you said, you've kind of had a career journey since then. So I guess, the first part really would be to find out a little bit more about what was that transition like coming to the end of that final year and sort of becoming a graduate. How did that feel, and how did that journey start, I guess?
Gosh, how did it feel? It felt how did it feel? Like I kind of felt like I didn't really want to leave, as I guess imagine most students do. But like when I say I didn't want to leave, it's not that I didn't want to leave university. I didn't want to leave Huddersfield. Like Huddersfield had become my home at that point. I'd had so many positive experiences there. But I tried to find jobs up north. I looked for places in Leeds and Manchester, and unfortunately I couldn't get anything. So I ended up moving back to Reading. But that was September. And then by November, I got my first junior designer job at an agency in London. And from there, that's where my career kind of like took off. And it's been a transition more in the sense that, yes, I've learned kind of like more skills and things like that, but I've also learned more soft skills like time management, relationship management, organization and stuff like that, which I didn't perhaps learn as much about at university. It's all about kind of like what you're designing, what you're creating. So that coupled with what the soft skills I was learning actually kind of like really helped me grow in confidence and helped me grow in just kind of like capabilities, I suppose. And that's what I really kind of like took from being a junior designer through to midway as well. Like you are quite kind of like self-aware of yourself, when you're just starting out in your career, you kind of like imposter syndrome, you're just like, nothing's good enough. Why do people like this, etc. But through kind of like dealing with other professions, like I don't know, like I work predominantly in marketing and advertising, so account managers, project managers, like freelancers as well who come in, like getting to know and appreciate those people and what they do actually helped me kind of like grow and develop my relationship skill sets as well. Like the kind of like your judgments about where to like be accommodating, where to push back if necessary, where to kind of listen to what you're being told. That's something that I definitely kind of really didn't appreciate as a graduate, but what I came to really appreciate when I had started working for a couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's that ecosystem, isn't it? You kind of, when you're, particularly I think sort of sometimes when you're in school, because of the way we sometimes frame the world of work, you have this idea of like individual job titles, people working in little silos, and you never get to, if you're a graphic designer, you might never speak to a, advertising executive or things like that. So exactly. I think, as you say, that kind of feeling what it's actually like to be in a collaborative sort of workplace is, it can be a really big change. I mean, you mentioned obviously kind of right at the top of the podcast about that you're currently a freelance designer. So, I mean, how did that kind of journey develop? And I believe it was probably not the smoothest of pathways, I think, given when it happened.
Yes, it was not the smoothest of journeys. Yes, that's the very politically correct way of putting it. I made the decision to go freelance in October 2019. I also got married in 2019, and my husband and I, we were due to go on our honeymoon the following year. We coincided it with our wedding anniversary as well. So we'd have been married for a year, then we would go on our honeymoon. We would come back from the honeymoon, and then I would have this kind of like clean slate to go freelance. So I handed in my notice on the 20th of February, 2020. So yes, in the news, coronavirus was a thing, but it was only, if I remember correctly, only really sort of like in an issue in China, and then possibly in Italy, maybe at that point. And everyone was naively like, oh, we'll be fine. It won't touch us, whatever. And then fast forward 4 weeks, I had my last day over Teams, which was really strange. Everyone was kind of a bit also distracted as well. And then that was the Friday. We had the weekend, and then my wedding anniversary was the Monday. Couldn't go out and celebrate it. Everyone had, like, all restaurants were closed and went out to go out. And then Boris Johnson told us at 7:30 that evening, we're going into a national lockdown. So no honeymoon either. So I had to bring forward my freelance plans once Boris had told us that we were going into lockdown. But this also coincided with basically all advertising budgets being paused or locked or got rid of, because what's the point in advertising if you've got nothing or no one to advertise to? So yeah, it was a bit of a journey, I guess. And I didn't qualify for any support. Like, obviously I couldn't get furlough because I wasn't full-time. I didn't qualify for any government grants because I hadn't been working I'd literally been freelancing for like a day. So couldn't get any of that. And so kind of fell through the cracks. And then I basically had to try and figure out how to make a success of the situation I was in. And I kind of like circle back to the relationships point I was talking about earlier with I learned like the soft skill I learned as a junior designer. Over the course of my career, I've always been very adamant in maintaining and keeping and nurturing relationships with people, regardless of who they are. And during the start of the pandemic, there were a handful of my contacts who still needed design work doing. Granted, it was all sort of like coronavirus related, but their full-time staff were on furlough, but they still needed someone to do the work. So that's where I fortunately had enough connections to kind of like supplement a little bit of income for those first few months of the pandemic. But I think like for the first 5 months of the pandemic, like I had a little bit of savings, those few gigs, and that was it. And I just kind of like watched all my personal finances just kind of like witter away. Like, fortunately, I'm married. I'm by no means saying I had like the worst time, but it was a struggle. And then like my personal net worth, probably I think it got down to like £30, like, or less than £30 to my name. And that was tough. Like, mental health took a hit as well. And I think everyone thought at the time, like, is this it? No one knew what was going on. But then come the summertime, this was about August, advertising agencies had started to kind of like ramp up work again, because everyone had sort of fallen into the rhythm of working from home. And I got a call from my friend John, who I actually met at my first job, and he was like, "Are you free?" So I checked my calendar, saw how empty it was, and I was like, "Yes, I'm free." And he was like, "I've got a 2-week booking for you. Like, would you be interested?" I was like, "Well, yes, please. I need some work." That 2-month booking turned into a 7-month rolling contract. I went from having no work to having all of the work, and it was such a shift, but such a positive shift, because it kind of gave me that sort of like light at the end of the tunnel, that the decision I had made to go freelance was actually the right one. And it was one of these sort of like moments where I was just like, kind of felt a little bit vindicated for making the decision to go freelance, because particularly when I chose to go freelance, I could have easily gone back to my previous employer and be like, "Hey, can I come back? Like, but I just wasn't willing to do that, and I just wanted to try and make a success of it. And fortunately, thanks to a relationship and a connection that I had made during my career, my freelance career basically blossomed from there.
And I mean, do you feel as though kind of, I guess, freelancing has been, as you said there, it was a positive, eventually positive change, even though some initial disruption. What do you kind of see, I guess, are the big differences for you from having been in those sort of junior or mid-level designer roles to now being a freelancer? And why did you feel it fits you, I guess, so much better?
I think it's to do with probably the level of control that I now have over my career. Because I worked in advertising, or sorry, still work in advertising. You're obviously beholden to the clients that either you choose or that your agency that you freelance with works with. And being full time, there were certain clients that I wasn't particularly happy working with. And being freelance, I've got the option and the choice, because of the client base I now have, to just be like, don't really want to work with that. I'd like to go somewhere else. Or likewise, if I want to take like a 1 month holiday, I can do that, obviously providing I can afford to do so. But that level of flexibility, that level of control, just makes me really happy. And it actually now kind of like coinciding with the whole working from home shift as well, has actually made this whole stint feel a lot more like normal, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess, if you've been through that type of disruption you went through initially, transition, anything else that comes after it is probably less challenging to an extent, I guess.
Honestly, like the world can come at me now. Like I've dealt with everything.
So recurring theme, obviously, that's kind of come up throughout the podcast so far, as you've talked about the importance of people and the importance of relationships. So are there any kind of key figures, I guess, in your career that you'd like to give a personal shout out to? And these don't just have to be professional.
Yes, I think literally all of the various contacts I have made through my 10 plus years of working, I think probably most big shout out goes to my friend John, who got me that 7 month rolling stint during the pandemic. He was just doing his job, getting a freelancer in to do the work, but I don't think he truly realizes how much of a positive impact that has had on me and my career. So fundamentally, he is one of those people who I will always be thankful for, because he's basically kick-started this career for me. And I think all of the other various freelancers I've met over the course of my career as well, each one of them and their unique experiences has somewhat influenced me as well, be it through the stories they've told me, the advice they've given me. All of their tips, again, have helped me get to where I am. Another freelance friend of mine, also called John, actually, he gave me lots of advice with regards to setting myself up as a freelancer as well, the right way and the wrong way to do it, or personal circumstances taken into account, obviously. And yeah, he just really bullet pointed out it's do this, this, and this, and I basically did that, and that, and that's kind of led to where I am today, which has been really great. But I think the biggest shout out has to go to my husband, Johnny. Another John, 3 Johns.
This is
recurring theme, yeah. He's been by my side ever since I started this graphic design career, from graduation through to now, and he has been with me through thick and thin, and he has always been there to support me and pick me up when I have those wobbles, when I don't think I'm good enough, when the imposter syndrome does kick in, and he is always there, just to sing my praises and just to be a rock to lean on, which for me, again, kind of being freelance as well, it's kind of a lone wolf sort of situation. Just having someone like that to lean on really does count for a lot. And he's basically the mountain that my castle is built on. I love and respect him so much.
That's so great to hear, and I think we've heard this on previous episodes of the podcast too, where people are talking about just how important those personal relationships are. Yes, networking great, professional relationships great, but just, how vital, as you said, how much stability those those personal relationships can bring. So it's brilliant to hear. So yeah, big shout out to Johnny and all the Johns as well.
Johnny and all the Johns.
All the Johns out there in the world. Johnny and the Johns could be a band name. We could might TM that one. Fantastic. Thanks, Ben. I mean, great reflections on your career so far, and brings us really nicely to the final section of the podcast, which is our underrated careers advice. So already I know you've kind of shared some of the sort of the key insights from your career to date, but is there any kind of specific, I guess, nuggets or gems of information you want to share with any current students or graduates or anyone else who might be watching that have been, I guess, key learnings from your career?
Sure. I think my biggest piece of advice is actually inspired by a quote that was made famous by a graphic artist called Anthony Burrell. He's a fantastic typographer and graphic artist. Like, look at his work; he's really great. But I think this is like 2014. He released a book along with a series of prints, and like the hero print was "Work hard and be nice to people." Now, that phrase absolutely underpins who I am as a designer. It's in my opinion, it's one thing to be a good designer, someone who is good at your craft, someone who's good at, just making nice things. But it's a whole other thing to be a good designer who can do all of those things, but who is also a pleasure to work with. And that, I think, kind of sometimes doesn't get sung as much in the kind of university course sense. It's all focused on the craft. I'd like to think it kind of goes without saying, like, basically don't be awful to people when you start to work. But some people just are. And my advice would be to just always, work hard, graft, be a good designer, or just be a good anyone. But also treat others with the kind of respect that you would expect to receive as well. So that would be like my main piece of advice. And then I would also say like network, and like particularly whilst you're at university, make a point of like getting involved with, I don't know, like if there are any kind of like design specific collectives that are at your university, which will give you a chance to meet people, students in other years groups as well. Again, you start fostering relationships from that age as well. Go out into your local city, town, and try and work your way into the community there as well. Like do a little bit of freelance work for a local shop or something like that who might need some freelance design work. Even just little things like that will really kind of start to open your mind before you graduate as to how the client work will be once you actually get into work. Those will probably be my two biggest pieces of advice, certainly to students. I think the work hard and be nice to people applies to everyone.
Universal, yeah. And I mean, really, really valuable advice. I mean, I think what's nice about that latter piece of advice you've just given is it chimes really well with something that our last podcast guest, James, was talking about when he was kind of, I guess, saying as an entrepreneur the benefits of kind of getting out there and breaking outside the university bubble, going into kind of local community, local businesses, finding out what's actually happening, gaining I guess what we'd call commercial awareness, but actually, commercial awareness, very vague, bit nebulous. What we really mean is, as you say, kind of getting out there, finding out what's kind of happening. And so I think that's really great to hear. And then equally, as you say, that universal advice around work hard, be nice to people. Yes, I would say it's almost like the epitome of what we mean by underrated careers advice. Works for everybody, but doesn't get talked about. Not as flashy, not necessarily always the subject of LinkedIn posts or the like. So really,
absolutely.
Well, Ben, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, sharing your insights. If we've had any students or graduates from Huddersfield watching this who might want to kind of get in touch with you, what's the best place for them to kind of find you or reach out?
Best place would be if you go on to LinkedIn and search for my name. I'm sure it'll be kind of written somewhere. Sometimes people get my last name wrong. It's either spelled with a D or a JU. So hit me up on LinkedIn, send me a message. I would love to hear from you. I'm also part of a mentorship scheme called Recreate. So if there are any design students who are signed up to that, reach out to me. Be happy to be a mentor to anyone, or if anyone just has any questions, just reach out. I'd love to help.
That's fantastic. We will make sure we ping those kind of details up on the screen as if by magic in the final edit. So yeah, do have a look out for those. And I mean, fantastic offer of support there. So really appreciate that, Ben. And that brings us really nicely to the end of the podcast. So, thank you so much for joining us and becoming another member of the Hud Grad Club. And obviously we wish you all the best with the continuing freelance career and everything else you've got going on. And hopefully eventually that trip that you had planned.
Oh gosh, yes, it would be so good to get on that honeymoon. Thank you so much for having me, Chris. I really appreciate it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ben. All the best. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Enjoyed the podcast? Then go to the University of Huddersfield YouTube channel for all of our future episodes. Subscribe, like, and don't forget to hit the bell button for notifications. If you'd like to be involved in the Hud Grad Club podcast moving forward, please get in touch with us on alumni@hud.ac.uk.